Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. That's what this is called. We're excited to be back in the chair, and we've got a fantastic guest lined up for you this week. I'm sure there's going to be lots of writing tips and advice throughout, as well as a good old chat about writing and everything else involved, including life and many other things. And I'm sat here with Chris Hooley, my co-host, as always. How are you doing, Chris?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited about this conversation because it's very much in my field of interest. Psychological thrillers. I'd love to learn how to write one. I'm looking forward to hearing JD's process and how he sort of got involved in that. And Bookouture, again, it's another publisher that we really like, and we've had a lot of people on the show from Bookouture. Getting any insights in the publishing industry is always interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I messed up last week's show. It was a double booking, but not really a double booking. They'd rescheduled and I forgot to remove last week's booking. So it happened to come around and I hadn't realized. And then once I had tweeted it all out or posted it out, contacted the publisher, they said, it's not until a couple of weeks. So I apologize on that one. So we missed a week of a show, but that was all good. It was Easter holiday week. And I'm sure people had lots to get on with anyway. And, if you were missing the show that much, we've got way over 350 videos out there now to check out. So thank you for those who were looking forward to last week and missed out. So I do apologize. But we are back. And yeah, there's some exciting things going on, including that we have had another invitation back to the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival this year, which will be the 4th year returning to that festival. And we're going to be interviewing for Pan Macmillan once again, Chris. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, no, it would be good. It'd be good to go on the weekend and enjoy that. And yeah, any time that you get to spend around writers, and particularly crime writers and psychological thriller writers, is always a good time, because even though they are horrible on the page, in terms of things that they do, they are some of the nicest people that you will ever meet. So it's definitely a good thing to get to if you can. I'd recommend it to anyone just to go at least once. It's a very unique atmosphere in terms of, you get to mingle and have drinks with, like you were last year with Mark Billingham sat behind you, and I was like, it's Mark Billingham, and you were like, who? and then you had a so it's always good to do that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, he is there this year, Lee Child, many other people. Fantastic lineup, and as Chris said, it's a great place to go and enjoy yourself, but it's also a great place to network. So get out of your little shell, and if you're listening or watching this and you think you can attend, go for it. We'll see you there. We'll have a drink with you, and you can watch us interview some people in real life. So if that's something you want to do, get in touch and let us know. And not only that, if you've got ideas for stuff you want us to do there, send them our way. We're willing to do silly things, as you may know.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously the big test for me is going to be, last week was a year long of sobriety. I hit it. And go into a festival where it's notorious for everyone just drinking and getting blind drunk into the early hours of the morning. That's going to be a massive test for me. So yeah, send us ideas, send us things to do, because I will be more than up for them, to avoid getting involved in the drink side of things. And yeah, I'll manage that list of things. So I'll save the best ones to when I get really drunk, and then I'll be like, oh, they've suggested this. Off you go.
Yeah, I don't need much convincing, to be honest. Anya says, congratulations, Hooley. And I completely agree. That is a fantastic achievement. And, you should be very proud of that. We are very proud of you for doing it. And I think it's very admirable that you've done that. And it's a really good achievement. So, yeah, make sure you do appreciate what you've done there, Chris. And thank you for the comments in there. Halo said, people who do terrible things to characters are the sweetest. So
that is true. Yeah. Definitely.
Amazing. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to get our guest on, and we're going to have a great chat about writing. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, we've had JD on before, so we will link this in the YouTube video. I'll point up there now and link it the old video if you want to see his sort of road into the writing world. So this is going to be kind of a free-for-all. So if you've got questions throughout the show today, send them all in throughout. Don't have to wait till the end. Just get them in there, get in the conversation between yourselves, and send some questions in as well. So tonight we're joined by a returning guest, as I mentioned, who needs little introduction, because chances are if you've read crime fiction in the past few years, you've likely read one of his books. Under the name JD Kirk, he sold millions of copies of his gripping DCI Logan series, building a fiercely loyal readership in his sharp writing, dark humor, and unforgettable characters. But tonight, we're here for something new. JD Kirk, aka Barry Hutchison, is making a major genre shift, stepping into the world of psychological thrillers with his brand new book, above Chris's head, called My Daughter is Missing. So with that in mind, please give me a hand in giving a nice warm welcome back to the Writing Community Chat Show. JD Kirk, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
We're doing really well. Thank you for joining us. How
Nice.
is JD?
Good. 1 year. Well done. I have to chime in on that. Good work. That's impressive.
It really is.
Coming from a Scotsman. So yeah, really nice to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. And, you know, we had a brilliant conversation last time. As Chris has just mentioned, we got your road to writing. You sort of opened our eyes to how much money you can actually earn if you graft at it and really get to grips. And the speed in which you write books is really impressive as well. And I remember you talking about last time having you set up in your office and, you know, taking the role seriously and going, you know what, I'm going to go to my office and treat this as a 9 to 5. And it was really inspirational to hear that sort of story. Because for me personally, even though we've interviewed loads of people, your story was one of the first where I was like, "Ooh, that can happen if you put the work in." Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was always something I really, wanted to do. I was 9 years old when I decided I wanted to be an author, and then when I got to the point that I was kind of doing it as a job, it's like, well, I sort of owe that to 9-year-old me to do it properly and take it seriously. So. And that didn't happen straight away. When I was writing kids' books, I was constantly skint, and I was always trying to start like a side business, like a side hustle thing that would make the money, and I could still do the writing. And then it's when I kind of realised that the writing part was my business, and I started looking at it from that side of things. Then that's when everything took off, and that's kind of around the time I started self-publishing, because it was I could either sell my product, the book, to one customer or publisher and hope that they then treated it well and made money out of it, and then gave me a tiny amount of that, or I could sell it to potentially 8 billion people around the world. So that made more sense just from a business point of view. And I would say creatively, I'm happier now than I have been in years, because I can write what I want to write without a publisher telling me to put a unicorn in it, or make it about a vampire or whatever it may be that happens to be flavor of the month at that point.
Yeah, I imagine it must be very difficult as an author to have that kind of suggestion pushed onto you if that's not really what's in your heart or your mind at the time to write, and then you've got to kind of come up with that story that may not be a free-flowing story.
Yeah,
that's really there for you.
Absolutely, yeah, and it happened quite a lot, especially with the bigger publishers, so likes of HarperCollins. I was fortunate that I was always working. I did my first deal with HarperCollins in 2007, I want to say. The first book came out in 2010. And I did 10 books with HarperCollins, something like that. But it would get to the point when I would pitch an idea to the editor, and the editor would go, "I love that, that's great." And then it would go to an acquisition meeting. Now, at the acquisition meeting is the sales and marketing department, is every possible department within the publishing company is there at this meeting, and they all get to chip in. So people that aren't necessarily creative led, or aren't thinking about what's best for this story, might be thinking, well, we're in the sales department and we know that Waterstones currently want series for 7 to 9-year-olds. So even though this is a standalone for 12 and over or whatever, can you change it to make it a series for 7-year-olds?
Wow.
Those are two very different things. You might take some element of it, but it means you're compromising, and it sounds a bit wanky, but you're compromising your vision in that way and having to change it. So not having to do that is nice. Basically, being able to go, this is the story I want to write. I'm going to write that story, and then it just sort of like lives and dies on whether people want to read it or not, and that's fine. So you have that freedom, but then you have the responsibility of if nobody wants to read it, you kind of go, well, I made a bad call there, but it's your call to make.
So the interesting part of that then is the fact you talked about having the freedom to do what you want. And what you seem to have wanted to do is psychological thrillers and move slightly away from the crime fiction world. So what was that kind of push for you to go in that direction?
So I think a big part of that is that I get bored quite easily. So I've written, I have no idea how many books I've written now, 200 and something books in total. So, 180 of those were kids' books, and I wrote the Beano for 2 years, and I've written loads of other comics. My first feature film has just finished production. I was finished being edited. I'm going to New York to see a screening of it in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
So that'll be cool. Done TV. So I do lots of different things. So it's never really... I'm kind of led by stories and characters. So if I go, I've had an idea for a story, I don't think I want to write a psychological thriller. I think I've had this idea for a story or a character or whatever it may be, and that then leads the way. And then I kind of shape that story and I write it, and it's like, okay, this is a psychological thriller. This is not... So it wasn't a deliberate, I want to come up with a psychological thriller and move into that. It was, I had an idea for a couple of different stories, actually, which happened to be psychological thrillers. And at that point, Bookouture had come to me a few times and said, would like to work with you on something. Now, the DCI Logan series is self-published, and that's kind of, my baby. That whole universe thing there is sort of my baby. And I thought, well, nobody's getting their hands on that. But I have this other thing, and Bookouture has a really good reputation for psychological thrillers. And I wasn't entirely confident with, I hadn't really read many psychological thrillers. Like I say, it wasn't a deliberate, this is the type of book I'm going to write. It was, this is the idea for a story. And it was kind of, as it was coming together, that I realized that's what it was a psychological thriller. So when Bookouture were kind of saying, well, we'd like to do something, I thought, well, let's try doing this and drawing on their sort of expertise a bit.
Yeah. First of all, I want to, just before Chris, I can see his mind working there for a question, but just to congratulate you on an incredible so far success on the amount of work that you've done across multiple sort of creative genres. I think it's absolutely inspiring and incredible. So it's just, amazing.
Thanks very much. I don't take compliments well. I get really awkward when people compliment me, so I should just nod and say thank you very much, and that's we shall move on to something else.
Yeah, I felt a bit awkward after saying it, but I think it is.
Yeah, a lot of men don't take compliments very well. You got beautiful eyes, by the way. No, man.
Thanks very much.
My question, my question was going to be linked to, like, what if you had to give somebody a piece of advice for each type of writing in terms of TV, film, novels, children's books, like what one piece of advice would you give?
So that's interesting. I would say it's really about asking yourself why you're doing it. Like, I think if you go, there are lots of reasons to write a book, and they're all perfectly valid. And it may be that you want to leave a legacy for your grandchild to read and connect with you, through the generations. It might be that you have a story you're desperate to tell and you just want to put it out into the world. It might be that you want to be the next James Patterson and become a, multi-millionaire. And all those things involve different strategies. And the same with, if you're going to want to be a huge, children's author, then knowing where your destination is helps you kind of choose which path you're going to take. So I would say if you wanted to be a children's author, then probably don't self-publish, because there's not a huge demand for children's books self-published on Kindle, for example. There are routes into doing it, but if you were going, I want to write the next, middle grade novel, big, huge, then that would be looking at traditional publishing probably. So it's asking yourself what you want to achieve at the end, and then building your strategy at the start then to kind of lead you there. Does that make sense? I feel like I just waffled a load of shite there. I think
it does make sense.
What you want to achieve at the end, and then that tells you what path you need to set out on.
It does make sense. And what I was going to say as a sort of caveat to that question is, what's the difference between having a really good idea? Because some people may watch a TV series and think, "Oh, love that! I've got an idea, similar, or I could do something like this." Or I watched that film and that was great. Or I've got a good idea for a book. What's the difference between having a good idea and then putting it on paper and actually writing it? What have you learned from your experience of having that idea and then getting it to paper?
It's just discipline is all it is. I have 200 ideas a day. I can't write 200 books a day, much as I would like to, but I have 200 ideas a day. Everyone probably does. And I meet people all the time who say, I'm going to write a book, and they might be in their 50s or 60s, whatever. And if they're at that point, chances are they're not going to write the book, because you've had 50 years, 60 years, whatever it may be, to write that book. And it's difficult sometimes. I wrote my first children's book in sort of 5-minute snatches when I was working for the Highland Council, and I had breaks in between the things I was doing of 5-10 minutes, and I would sneak along this tiny little battered old sort of netbook laptop, and I would type on that. So the idea of saying you don't have time, no one has time. You just have to make time. You have to prioritize. Don't watch EastEnders, don't scroll through Facebook. I would say don't listen to podcasts, but make an exception for that. But we're all time poor nowadays, and if you really want to write a book, then make that 15 minutes every day. And in that 15 minutes, you can write 250 words, 300 words. Over the course of a year, you'll finish a book. So it's just about discipline. That's how you write a book is one word at a time. And if you don't do that, then you don't have a book. And the other thing I would say as well, a trap I used to fall into all the time, was I would write sort of the first third of a book. And at that point, it gets difficult. It gets boring at that point. You get into the middle of the book, which is sort of the dullest part to write. And I would keep going back, and I would keep refining that first third. And I had some brilliant first thirds of books, but nobody will buy the first third of a book. The first third of a book is nothing. It doesn't matter if it's the best first third of a book ever written. That's still not as good as the worst full book. So it's getting that first draft down. I mentioned just before I came on, I'm writing the second Bookature book I'm doing at the moment, and I wrote the first draft in 16 days, start to finish. Now it is fucking awful. Like it is, when I read it over, it's garbage. But it exists. It is now a thing, and I can take that sort of lump of clay that I've put on the wheel now, and in the next draft, I will shape that into something that's a bit better. And then the next draft, I will improve it again and refine it. But getting that lump of clay on the wheel is the first step. And that's, if you can do that, you're already ahead of 99.9% of the population that say they want to write books. If you can just get that first book done. So give yourself permission to write the worst book ever written, and then just make it better. Just iterate it and make it better each time. Because too many people get trapped in that same I'm refining, going back and refining the first third or the first half, or whatever it may be, and it doesn't matter how good that is. It's not a thing. It's nothing.
It's really interesting, that whole process you talked about, and having your reason. And I put that in the chat. So what's your reason you write? And Anna's given a great reason. She says, I write because I can't hit people in real life, but I can hit them on paper. So it's kind of like revenge writing in that sense.
Yeah.
And I like
that's why I started writing crime fictions, because I can kill people in books, but I can't do it in the real world.
Oh man, in reality, if you can be a bit more clear with us on this, that most crime writers probably do this, but how many people do you feel in a story do you actually compare to real people, if that makes sense? Or how much do you take from real life?
I think I would say there's nobody I've ever written who's based on one person. I'd say everyone I've ever written is based on kind of everyone I've ever met, or some element you take from them. That said, there's a character in my DCI Logan series, and he has his own spin-off series called Robert Hoon. And Hoon was sort of detective superintendent in the DCI Logan series, and then he gets his own spin-off series. And he's a monster. You know, he was written to be the most sort of foul-mouthed, obscene, just grotesque human being. Just like he's the worst boss imaginable. And he was like supposed to be an exaggerated, you know, this person can't exist. And the number of emails I've had from people, serving police officers especially, who say, I know who that is. I know who you've based it on. And it's like, no, he doesn't. Like, if he exists, you need to get onto HR, because this person should not be working with you, you know. So, but yeah, I would say everyone's based on, and lots of them are based on some element of me. You know, there's some aspect of me in there, and there's some, you know, when I'll see people that are sort of have something about them that's really interesting and stands out, I'll make a little note about that. Now, I'll never use that person, but that aspect of their character might make it into another character, you know, whether that's, you know, something visually about them, the way they dress or whatever, or the way they talk, or so that might make it into a character. But there's nobody that's based on anyone specific, apart from some of the people I've murdered, who may or may not be based on people that I have encountered.
To what extent does that go to then? Because, for example, if you're out in a bar in the night and it's quite busy and you're having a good laugh, and suddenly you see someone that really can draws your eye, are you like, hang on a minute, pull your notes up on your phone and do it there? Is that the sort of thing you do, or is it?
No, I wouldn't necessarily do it there. I'll maybe sort of observe them a little bit, you know, and then I'll be kind of making notes in my head. Go, okay, remember that, and then I'll jot it down when I go home, or whatever. Or I'll stick if they're interesting enough, I'll just stick in there, you know. And it might not be until 3 books later that surfaces again. I go, right, what's this character? And it's like, okay, that thing that I saw then, that's perfect for this person I'm writing now.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip that we've not really.
I don't like take photos of them. Like, hang on a minute, you look really weird.
Yeah,
yeah, so it kind of surfaces eventually.
Well,
I think that's a great way of coming up with stories idea as well, as just listening to people and just kind of asking questions. And, you know, if I go, well, why is he wearing that hat? You know, who bought him that hat, and why is he, you know, is it for a bet? Is it, and that then just can lead to, the more questions you ask, the more you sort of generate stories automatically almost.
Yeah. I'd like you to take it back very slightly to where you spoke about having hundreds of ideas a day, and obviously not being able to write all those ideas, of course, but what makes one of those ideas stand out for you then, and decide to go with that idea over the others?
It's the one that sticks in my head, I think. So I was at a school once, 'cause I used to do a lot of school events, talking about my kids' books. And someone said, where to get your ideas from? Well, that was kind of a question that was commonly asked. And I would kind of describe it as like being in a room with multiple different radios tuned to different stations, and you're hearing little sort of snippets from each one, little sort of, they're all talking, and you're hearing little bits, and then something will jump out and you'll focus on that and you go, okay, what was that? That was really interesting. And you'll zoom in on that. So that's how I used to describe it, until one kid said, that's ADHD. It's like, oh, okay, fair enough. But I find I'll have loads of ideas and I will forget 99% of them. And there'll be some that, even if I don't write them down, most of those, some of those ideas I will write down, but even though there'll be at least 1 or 2 a day that will stick in there, and I'll keep thinking about it, and I'll think about it when I'm lying in bed, and I'll think about it next day, and I go, right, that's the one that I need to write, because that I need to exercise this from my head almost, or it's going to be stuck in there forever. So even though I write down all these ideas I have, most of them I will never go back to because they haven't stuck in at that point. So it's the ones that stick are the ones that I have to write to get rid of them almost.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you just said that, JD, because I was gonna probe you on that, because you said about, you know, being bored, and that's why you've written in so many different areas.
Yeah.
And then obviously you've mentioned ADHD, and I actually wrote these two things down because I recently found out that I've got ADHD, and I've got like 5 different books on the go, all about 30,000 words.
Yeah.
I have that mad sprint at the beginning, and then I'm
Oh, so familiar. Yeah. That's what I used to always do, and that's what I said. It just comes down to discipline. Is going, because I would always get, and I imagine you're the same. I get distracted by the shiny new thing. I go, this is great. This is the best idea ever. Blah 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 blah. I'm 30,000 words in. That's when it gets difficult. That's when the initial sort of novelty is worn off, and you're not yet at that mad sprint to the finish. You're in that sort of, you're wading through the middle, and then you go, well, actually, this idea is better. I'll ditch this and I'll start this idea instead, because this is the one. This is the one that's going to be great. And then you do the same thing. You get 30,000 words in, and you go, oh no, actually, it's this one. This is the one that's going to do it. And I fell into that trap all the time, and it's just discipline. It's just going, okay, I'll write all that down, and I'm going to finish this one first. And that's the only difference between someone that wants to be an author and someone that is an author. It's not about talent. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about the perseverance to finish writing a book. Because once you've done that, you're an author. You know, and you might not be a published author at that point, but you are an author. You have authored a novel. So it is that persistence to finish it.
Have you found like any techniques away from sort of the office, so to speak, in terms of like, when I found out, I was reading up about it, and it was saying like caffeine can be a really good motivator because it can help you focus and things like that. So when I was looking into it, I was like, oh, I might try that, and I might try this tablet that's recommended, or I might try this supplement that's recommended, and see if it can sort of focus me a little bit more. Or I read somewhere that people are saying like make it into games and things like that to sort of give you a sense of achievement. So I'm just wondering if you found anything sort of away from that to sort of improve your discipline and make it a bit easier for you to get involved.
I would say for me, it's about recording what I'm doing, and it's about setting tangible, sort of actionable goals. So rather than say I'm going to write today, I will go, I'm going to write 3,000 words today. And what I will tend to do is I go, right, this book is, let's say a DCI Logan book is roughly 90,000 words. Now, if I said I want to write this book in a month, so I give myself 30 days, then I have, 90,000 words divided by 30, I have 3,000 words a day. And then I track it. I track it on a spreadsheet, and I go, okay, so I have hit my target for that day, click. And I will try and beat. So I will try to get ahead. So I'll say, right, well, I want to take a day off. So in that case, if I want to take a day off halfway through the month, I need to get ahead by that 3,000 words over the course of the next 14 days. So that means I'll try and do a little bit more every day. But for me, tracking it and having those actionable targets really helped a lot. I think if you just go vaguely, I'm going to write a book this year, then come December 30th, you're going, oh, I didn't write that book. But if you say I'm going to write 500 words a day, by the end of that you finish the book sort of halfway through the year at that point. I think my maths are right. Yeah, I think it's setting a target for yourself and tracking that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm going to try that and see if it helps a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way my brain works, it really helps, because then I can see progress. I can go, okay, I've done that, and I can do, and you can get into, like there's a bit of software called Pacemaker. I think it's pacemaker.press, which is really good because it'll do all this with graphs and all that stuff. And there's a free version which is perfectly good. And you put in, how many words you're aiming for, and and if you say I want weekends off, it'll calculate how many words you need to do during the week to make up for that. And And then it's it's all on graphs and all kinds of stuff. So the sort of data geek in me really likes all that stuff. And so I find that useful.
Nice.
Just linked it up there for you guys, and hopefully check it out. And that sounds amazing.
Hopefully that's the right address, and it's not some really dodgy website I just pointed towards. I'm pretty sure it is.
I've just found it. So yeah, you're quite right. And I
God.
think that's a great bit of advice for someone who can get into that, because those little tools can really help people, and I think that's fantastic.
And I think it shows you as well, because if you're going like me saying I'm writing a book in a month, that's most people aren't doing that, But if you say I'm writing a book this year, and it will give you a very manageable daily word count to aim for. And I think the trick is just to switch off your sort of internal editor, So that's what I did. That's how I wrote that book in 16 days. Even when writing it, I knew this is rough, But had I gone back to tweak it, I wouldn't be finished it yet. So it's turning off that internal editor is really, really important, I think.
It is. That whole discipline, what you mentioned, is absolutely something that not only gets you. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I did a video. People that wait for the motivation, it might not come, or when it does, it's very fleeting.
Yeah, I think. I would say 10% of the time that I write, I feel I'm in a flow state and the muse is upon me and all that stuff. And the other 90% of the time, I just have to do it all the same. It's like you couldn't be, a brain surgeon and only do brain operations when the muse was upon you. You can't. There's not another job where that's allowed. You can't use it as an excuse. So if you just go, well, this is a job, or I want it to be a job. If you're not at that point, then treat it like a job. You wouldn't go into your job and say, "Oh, I haven't got the inspiration to teach this class today, or to whatever, or to whatever it may be." You just have to knuckle down and get it done, whether you want to or not. So yeah.
Yeah, as teachers, me and Chris both know that we definitely don't have the motivation when we have to perform, but we do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. You do. You step up there and you do it.
No, I think that consistency is key, and that will create your own motivations as well, because you'll push on with the story. So that's probably the biggest tip I think in the show so far is getting that consistency and then really drumming that in. Even if you do it as a test for say a month, 30 days, just make sure you push yourself to do it and see what happens.
Yep. So absolutely.
I'm really interested to learn what you learned from Bookachore when you said at the start of the interview that they were really good in the field of psychological thrillers, and you're excited to work with them because of that. Like, what have you learned from them during your process of working with them for My Daughter Is Missing?
I think probably what psychological thrillers are. Really, my editor was really good at I kind of wrote the book more like a sort of just dark comedy almost, which is fine. It was good. I think it was in terms of being a dark comedy novel about someone's daughter going missing. It was fine, but I don't think it really fulfilled the psychological thriller part. Maybe. So my editor was able to go, hey, this stuff's all great, and maybe lean this way with some of it, and so that was really useful, and certainly I think that's why I was able to write the second one that much more quicker, when I kind of understood as okay, yeah, I get the sort of the hook at the end of every chapter, and just being more now the crime fiction is quite fast paced anyway, but with the psychological thriller it was more that get the hooks in and pull the reader through chapter by chapter. And with the police procedural stuff, there's a lot more sort of characters just talking shite really, and chatting and all that stuff, because it's a team of people and it's about their relationships. The DCI Logan stuff at this point is as much a soap opera as it is crime fiction. It's about how all these people interact and how they know each other and how their relationships grow, and because this was something completely new, the characters in this just didn't exist prior to this book. It was I kind of took quite a bit of time, I think, getting to know them and sort of showing them, just hanging out and chatting. Then it was my editor at Bookouture was kind of like, okay, that's nice, but let's get to the point of, let's get the kind of the thriller element, more to the fore. So that was really useful.
I can imagine that. I looked through the reviews earlier, and it's only been out, I think, since the 16th, if I can remember, in the UK. And it's closing in on 1,000 reviews in that time, and I think that's absolutely incredible. And majority of the comments talk about the fast-paced nature of the story. So that relationship with your Bookouture professionals obviously really did help tune that in, and I think it must be a good learning curve for you as a very experienced author as well, having all your sort of already skills put in place, but then to have someone point you in a direction in a new genre, I think could like bolster your own skill set. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that is the key as well, though, is every time that whole thing of every day's a school day, I think is really important. I've written my first feature film recently and learned a lot doing that about screenwriting and about film production and all that stuff. Writing comics, how comics are structured is very different than how books are structured, but you're still telling a story, so it's how you convey that story. So I think that's when I say I get bored, I think it is as much that I'm really curious as to all these different genres and styles and media all work. So I think that's what kind of pulls me in different directions to go, well, I'm going to try this today, and tomorrow I might try that. So yeah, I think it's as much curiosity as boredom. Although I will also defend boredom. I think part of the problem that we have these days is we don't have an opportunity to be bored. We have literally, when I was young, growing up in the Highlands, we didn't even have a cinema. And we didn't, VHS was kind of fledgling at the time, and so you had 3 channels on TV, and that was it. So you spent a lot of your time bored, and that's where I think creativity comes from. I think now we have the world of entertainment in our pocket. 24 hours a day, we can access any piece of music ever created, or any film ever made, or whatever it may be. And we don't give ourselves that chance to be bored. And I think that is going to have a kind of negative effect on creativity in general.
I really agree with you on that. And something that makes me smile at the moment is the fact I've got my daughter's 9 years old, but she likes to play outside, but also she'll put down an iPad for the majority of the time, which a lot of kids won't, and she'll play with dolls and things.
Yeah, that's great.
That, for me, is imagination in play, and I know that's
absolutely.
Sort of
and my action figure, I grew up just playing with action figures. In fact, these are my original A-Team action figures from when I was about 8, I think. And yeah, used to make up stories with action figures and all that stuff. And when as I said, we had no cinema, but when I would see trailers come on TV for films, I would write my own version of it. I'd write the story that I thought the film was based on the trailer, because I knew it would be potentially years until I got to see that movie. To the extent that when I finally saw E.T., I was really confused because there was no ninjas in it. And I was convinced that there had been ninjas in E.T. And then I realized that was the version of E.T. I had written when I was about 7.
How disappointed.
I know. I mean, E.T. is great, but chuck some ninjas in it, and that's cinematic magic, I'm sure.
I think that's a fantastic game to do, whether it's a blurb of a book or a film. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, you just make your own. Yeah, take it, make your own. Yeah, mashing up. There's my daughter's got a game, a card game thing, and I can't remember what it's called now, but it's about pitching Hollywood ideas. So basically, you will draw these 2 cards out, and it will be a Western, and then the next one's about a 31st century nun, and then it'll be something else, and you have to pitch this to the rest of the group as a movie idea. And then they question you on it, and doing that is a great way of coming up with stories.
That sounds like a game for Harrogate, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. Loads of writers under a tent. Sounds like a good idea. I was going to say, JD, obviously you talked about like that boredom leading you to sort of want to know about new areas of writing and almost becoming an expert in that field.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the more research I do on ADHD and things like that, the more I see that a lot of people have those tendencies to go, oh, what's this new shiny thing that you said before? I want to know everything I can know about it, and then I'm done with it, and I'm on to the new thing. So my question, I think, is how do you manage that once you've discovered the new thing, you've sort of attempted it, finding the joy to go back to it again, and it being a thing that you can then go, oh, I quite like that, I'm going to go and do it again, rather than what's new.
That's a really good question. I would say it's a combination of factors for me. So one, from a practical point of view, writing is my job. So if I've had this idea, I put that out, and lots of people like it and give me money for it, then that's a good motivation to keep doing that thing. But it's also it's about, for me, it always comes down to the characters in a story. So if I want to spend more time with those characters, then I will keep writing those stories. So the DCI Logan series, for example, when I go back to write a new one of those books, it is like sort of catching up with old friends at this point. And I'm sort of really interested in what they've been doing between books. So it's almost like I don't know if I will ever stop writing them, because unless in the last book I just kill them all off, I will always be really interested in where they are and what they're up to and what those relationships look like. Some things, are like My Daughter's Missing is a standalone one-off book, so I probably won't go back to that world. Never say never. I might do, but that it was never written like that. So I find, it's that combination of sort of business, financial practicality, and how invested I am in the characters in those stories.
Yeah. Before we move on, and obviously we got to talk about your new book. Despite the conversation we're having is a lot of fun and very informative, we need to get that in there. But what one piece of advice can you give someone who may be at the stage where they've got a couple of books in their locker and they really want to take it to the next stage in terms of creating that sort of little business style sort of profile? What one piece of advice could you give them to take that step?
I would say more and more it's about thinking about what your author brand is, and I hate that terminology of branding and all that stuff, but it's how we sort of it's like a shorthand for people, because people like I said earlier are sort of time poor, and we don't have time to go and browse through 10,000 books to find one that we might like. So we have that, so we've sort of developed the shorthand of going, right, if I want a crime, if someone wants a sweary Scottish crime fiction novel, then that is sort of my JD Kirk brand. But now I'm sort of branching out into the psychological thriller stuff as well. But if I was to go and write romance, then I would attempt to do it under that brand, and that's why I had I published the sci-fi stuff and the kids books under my own name, because that was very, very different to the JD Kirk stuff. So that was a separate brand. So I would say think about what your brand is. So if you've got a couple of books under your belt, great. But if one of them's a garden manual and one of them's a epic fantasy, then those aren't really helping each other very much. So if you're starting out and you're going, right, I want to build a successful author career, I would be looking at what genres are really popular. So really, romance, crime, horror, sci-fi, those are all pretty big, particularly romance and crime. So I'd be looking into those genres, and then I'd be going, right, well, how can I build a body of work in one of those successful genres and brand them so that people know these books are by me and what these books are. So when people take a quick look at them and go, okay, this is a crime novel, or this is a psychological thriller, or this is a romance. So really it's about both your author and your book branding. Those, I think, are the keys to sort of give you the best chance of success anyway.
Yeah, nice.
Did that answer the question? Because halfway
Yeah,
through
it did.
that, I forgot what the question was, and I just kept talking and hoped for the
It really
best.
did. It did. Thank you. I was pausing because Chris, like, he unmuted and looked curious as if he was going to ask something, so I paused as well.
No, I was going to say, obviously, with My Daughter Is Missing, you seem to have tapped into a sort of fear that's quite prevalent at the minute. I've seen a lot of books released recently of children going missing and children being, disappearing and all that type of stuff. So I don't want to ask you where did you get your idea for this, but what made you tap into that field of, a parent's worst nightmare of their child going missing?
Yeah, I think it very much is sort of that worst nightmare thing. I am a parent myself. The first DCI Logan book was inspired when my daughter went missing. She was hiding, it turned out, but I thought she had disappeared and immediately went into full on panic, thinking what's happened. Someone must have taken her because we were in the middle of nowhere, and that actually inspired the mystery in the first DCI Logan book. So I think that thing, like you say, it is just that worst fear scenario. And then with this book, it was, well, what, the first thing you would do in that, looking back at the Litter of Bones, the first DCI Logan book, the child went missing. The first thing they did was go to the police, and the police investigation then all kicked off. So with this one, I thought, well, what if someone's child went missing, and for some reason they couldn't go to the police? There was something in their past that meant if they went to the police, that everything was going to blow up. So I thought, well, that's an interesting thing in itself. It's taking that first DCI Logan book and twisting it, and that's kind of what was the inspiration for the whole thing, really.
Yeah. Did you ever think to almost link them, despite being separate genres? So they go to sort of the same constabulary.
Yeah, I can't say that one either.
Yeah. But kind of like link them in a separate world, but together. Was that ever a thought for you?
Sort of vaguely, but then I thought it's that thing of I wanted to keep them separate, because some are published by me and some are published by Bookouture.
Yeah.
But it was also that thing of if I had dedicated DCI Logan fans that love every DCI Logan book, and he pops up in this one for half a chapter, say, they're going to want to follow him. That it becomes it's almost like a stunt casting thing of going, all right, cool. I'm reading it for him, and now that he's gone, I've lost all interest in it, and I wish I could see what he's doing. So, so I decided not to. There is in the one I've just written, there's a very tenuous connection. So they're both set in Edinburgh. So the second one, there's a connection between that book and this book, and My Daughter Is Missing. There's a little reference to something that happens, and there's a character from one of the DCI Logan spin-off series, a police character who makes a tiny little cameo appearance in the new book.
Yeah. Do you feel like the readers you have for the DCI Logan series have sort of transitioned along with you to this new sort of genre?
I would say some of them have, but part of the reason for this was to kind of reach new readers, so it was so it was, as I said, that the sort of DCI Logan brand is sweary Scottish crime fiction, and this isn't really that sweary. I think there's one outburst at one point that I couldn't hold back on. But I think a big part of the editor's job in this was to go, do they need to say fuck quite so often? So and I think that was very much a sort of looking at the American audience, and because a lot of I've had a lot of feedback from readers in America that would say, I will never read another one of your books because they swear, and it's like, oh, they also there's child death in it. There's people being murdered left, right, and centre. There's people being abducted and tortured, and it's the swearing that bothers you. I don't like. I've never understood it, but maybe that's just a Scottish thing. We swear
Well,
excessively at all
I'm sure
times.
Americans swear a lot as well.
Not the ones that read a lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's
I'm in
very
crime, but swearing is not allowed.
yeah, it's weird. It's a strange thing. Even the other thing was in the first DCI Logan book, there was a cat. It's implied a cat gets hurt.
Yeah, you
You
can't.
don't see the
Can't
cat
hurt
getting hurt.
animals.
Nope. You know, there's 3 kids referenced being murdered in that book. Nobody bats an eyelid. If you imply that a cat is in jeopardy, then you get a lot of hate mail. It turns out you get a lot of angry people.
Wow. People's morals, eh?
Yeah, strange.
Yeah.
People are odd.
There's a few questions coming in the chat, but I'm going to ask, obviously, if people have got them, just to send them in and we'll ask them in a second. But I was going to say, obviously, you mentioned about your editor sort of stepping in and talking about the hook at the end of every chapter.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's 2 questions that I've got about psychological thrillers. One, how many people, in terms of a main cast of characters, do you feel is the perfect amount? Because I've seen it vary with numbers in psychological thrillers. And how do you make that hook interesting enough for them to want to turn the page, but it not ruin the story and make it too exaggerative every single time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways of doing it is almost to just shift where your chapters end. So really, if you think, of a scene, if you go right, the scene starts, but let's say it's someone creeping through a house. So the scene is someone enters a house, creeps through a house, anxiously looking around, discovers the house is empty, leaves. That's the scene. But putting the end of the chapter at anxiously looks around is the hook for the rest of that. Then they go, okay, there might be someone here. If I ended that going, there's nobody in this house, everything's fine, end of chapter, move on to the next chapter, there's no incentive to turn the page. But if you go, there's a squeaky floorboard, turn round, gasp, end chapter, then that's the hook. So it's not about teasing what's coming next necessarily. It's structuring where those chapter breaks fall in your scene. So every scene, will have that sort of rising tension bit, and then that falls away because that scene is resolved. And it's about ending the chapter on that rising tension moment. Get to the most tense part of that scene, and that's where your chapter ends. And then it either picks up in the next scene, or you cut to someone else's perspective, and so you're dragging it out that bit. So they go, oh God, I want to find out who was in that house. So I'll read this chapter, but that chapter ends on a sort of mini cliffhanger as well. So it's like, okay, well, now I'm back to the house, so I can find out what happened there. But now I want to find out what happens in that other chapter, So it's just about structuring where the chapter breaks come more than anything. And in terms of how many people, I think it really depends on the story. So I would say in My Daughter Is Missing, we get 2 different points of view, and then we get a sort of a one-off chapter from someone else's point of view at the end. And that's actually, I've just realised, I'm saying that now, that's the same structure for the second book that I've done for Bookouture. I'd say the first half of the book is from one person's perspective, and then we cut to someone else's perspective, and it entirely changes what you've seen before. You kind of get it from this different perspective, and you understand what you've read in a different way. And then the kind of the last sort of third of the book is it cuts between those 2 points of view.
It's a great answer and a good question. But what we're going to have to do is we've got just over 5 minutes left. So as Chris mentioned, if you have got questions for JD, please send them in now. But we're just having such a good conversation. We're not really, you haven't pitched a book for us. So what we need you to do is let everyone know what My Daughter Is Missing is all about in the best kind of pitch you can.
Yeah,
we'll link that in the description and all that good stuff afterwards.
Really terrible at pitching it, because generally my problem is when I write a book, I immediately forget what happens in it. So in this, it's called My Daughter Is Missing, because there's a pretty big clue about what it's about in there. So it's about a woman called Elizabeth who's working at the school tuck shop for the Halloween disco. She's stuck out front. All the kids are inside having fun, dancing, dressed up. And then the disco ends, all the kids file out, and her daughter is not among them. Her daughter was in there dancing and has now disappeared. A couple of teachers realise that she's freaking out, and they offer to call the police. And at that point, she lies and says that she's just remembered that her daughter was picked up by her boyfriend and taken home, and that everything is fine. And we, as the reader, know that's not the case, but the teachers kind of believe it, and she then leaves and has to go and try and track down her missing daughter herself, and it turns out to be connected to some events from her past. Don't want to say too much more than that, for fear of giving stuff away, but that's the sort of gist of it.
Well, as I said, within just, I think it's about 10 days or so it's been released for, and it's nearly 1,000 reviews. So that goes to show how much people are really invested in this story. And saying
right now, at the time of speaking, it's on sale in the UK and the US for 99 pence or 99 cents.
Well, there you go. We'll link that and share it around with the show. So please do go and pick that up and support JD with this new directional change of genre. So very exciting. Brilliant. Okay, let's get some questions in. Halo's got a question for us, and she says, what similarities do you find between writing children's books and thrillers?
What similarities between children's books and thrillers? That is interesting. I would say, again, for me, it all comes down to character. And I think the best children's books that I wrote, because there were some absolute clunkers in there as well, but the best ones were about characters that I grew to care about. And I think a psychological thriller, I think the thriller part, is only thrilling if you care about the people that it's happening to. And I think that applies to everything. The plot of a book, the plot is stuff that happens, and what we care about is the people that plot is happening to. Yeah. And if you don't care about them, you can have the most intricate, clever, twisty turny plot imaginable, but there won't be an emotional connection to it because we don't care what's happening to these people. So I think it's creating characters that people can root for, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always likable. My daughter is missing. It's a woman that refuses to go to the police even though her child has been taken because of some shadiness in her own past. So that's not a great thing to do, but hopefully you will root for her all the same.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, and I think character development for me is always the interesting part of a show or a book. Is there a character that you have throughout, I don't know, TV, movies, or books that really stands out for you as a character that you just really like?
There's a character called Roberta Hoon, who is the sister of Robert Hoon from the DCI Logan and the Hoon series. And she's a character who, like I said, Hoon's like horrendous and foul-mouthed and just an awful human being. And in one of his books, a book called Westward, he goes back to his house, back to sort of the house where he grew up. There's people coming after him, and he knows if he sort of retreats there, then he can defend himself. And it was only when he got to that house, as I was writing it, when I was planning it, I thought the house was empty. And then his sister opened the door, and I had no idea that he had a sister until that point. It was just, bing, oh, he has a sister now. And she's kind of worse than him. She's his older sister, and he's like the one person she's the one person that he's afraid of. And their relationship and writing about her is like just a sort of joy to do. So I would say Roberta Hoon. So it's Robert Hoon and Roberta Hoon are the two of them. But I would say Roberta Hoon, writing her is my favourite. But a lot of it is its interaction is what I enjoy. So it's not necessarily writing one character; it's how that character reacts to other characters is quite often where the sort of enjoyment in writing comes from.
Yeah, nice.
And I would also say lots of my favourite characters are characters that appear for one scene, because you can have a lot of fun with those characters. You know, you can just do, you can just make some strange people that wouldn't necessarily, the logic of them wouldn't necessarily hold up over, you know, multiple scenes or multiple books. But as a sort of one and done pop up character, then they can be great fun to create.
Nice. We have pushed the hour, Chris, but do you have any questions to ask JD before we wrap this up? Because we're going to have to, based on the time, despite this great conversation that could probably go on for a good at least another hour, I think.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask the one that's in the chat, which is, what's the craziest thing you've done to motivate yourself to write? Because we've never had that before. I think it's a great question.
Craziest thing I've ever done to motivate myself to write. I don't know. I think maybe getting my treadmill desk was. I was kind of trying to get that thing being time poor again. It was like, right, I'm trying to condense the things I'm doing. So it was like, I want to get out and walk more and be more active, because it's a real sedentary job, you know, sitting writing all the time. So, and I thought, well, what if I got a treadmill and wrote on the treadmill? And the first time I tried it, it massively backfired, and I shot off the back of it and crashed into my bookshelf. And now I work on it kind of quite freely, and I sort of walk while I'm writing. And actually, if I'm writing like an action scene, I turn the speed up so I'm kind of running on the spot and trying to write. And it works. That's something about that kind of adrenaline, and that sort of it just feels like, okay, this is more action packed, you know. So the treadmill desk is probably the craziest thing that I've ever done to motivate myself to write.
I love that idea. You're writing a fast-paced scene and you're all sprinting up the desk. Come on! Oh, brilliant! Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you for the questions in the chat there. And JD, we've gone over the hour, and sorry to keep you later than expected, but
that's quite all right. Have a lovely time.
Easily 2 shows filled with you in it, and we could probably do a lot more. But there's some fantastic advice and tips in there, and a great sort of journey explained by yourself, and how you've moved on to this new genre. When you said you're writing the next book for Book of Cheer, when is that due to come out? Do you know?
The future. I think it's September. I've got a DCI Logan book out in July. So that comes out in July. I just had an Audible original come out in February.
Nice.
with David Tennant and Louise Brealey narrating that, so that was great. And what was crazy was that I kept getting sent pictures of big billboards all over like London and Liverpool and Glasgow, and with the book on it, David Tennant's face, and so that was great. That was really good fun. So, and again, that was just something different, you know, doing that. So yeah, I have, so the next one's a DCI Logan in July, and then the next Bookature in September, and then I have a DI Filson, which is one of the Logan spin-offs, in, I want to say, November, and then I have the next Audible original I'm doing in February.
Wow, that is a very busy schedule.
And I've got a film to write between now and the end of May.
Yeah. And again, that's a whole new conversation we could go into, but we can't do it right now. But hopefully, we never know. This could be there could be a part 3 to this interview series. But again, thank you so much for us. Chris, anything before I wrap this up?
No, just again, thank you, JD, for being so generous with your time and your advice. I'm sure people will get a lot from it. And obviously, support the authors, do support the show. So go out and get My Daughter Is Missing Today, whilst it's on special offer. And help JD out in that regard.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you very much, JD. Thank you, everybody in the chat. If you're sticking around for the after show, please do look out for the link. And have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.